Family is supposed to protect you. But what happens when your own blood turns against you? What happens when the people you trust the most become the ones who destroy you? This is my story. And trust me, karma never forgets. You are watching Karma's Call. Comment your country and the time you're watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories that will touch your heart forever. My name is Alara. I grew up in a small town in the United States, in a family that believed in hard work, love, and loyalty. My father owned a small construction business that we weren't rich, but we were happy. Every Sunday, our whole family would gather. My uncle, my aunt, my cousins, and my father would proudly say, "One day, all of this will belong to our children." Family means everything. I believed him. I believed that blood was unbreakable. That family would always stand together. But I had no idea that those same words would one day break me. Because when my father died suddenly in an accident, everything changed. Everything. When my father passed away, my world shattered. I was only 16. Too young to understand how cruel life could be. At first, my relatives pretended to care. My uncle said, "Don't worry, Alara. You're like a daughter to me. I'll take care of everything." And I believed him. But slowly, I started noticing the truth. The business my father built with his bare hands was taken over by my uncle. The house where I had grown up was transferred to his name. Every document, every signature, had already been arranged. I was confused, scared, lost. When I asked my uncle, he smiled and said, "You're too young to handle all this. Don't worry. Family comes first. I'll manage everything." But managing meant something else entirely. It meant pushing me out. It meant treating me like a burden. Within months, I went from being the daughter of a respected businessman to being the poor girl living in the corner of my uncle's big house. The same relatives who once hugged me at family dinners now whispered behind my back. I could hear them. "She's useless. She has nothing now. Just wait, she'll be gone soon." And they were right. Because one evening, when I returned from school, my uncle called me into the living room. He didn't look at me like family anymore. He looked at me like a problem. "Alara," he said coldly. "You're almost 17 now. You need to learn how to take care of yourself. We can't feed an extra mouth forever." I froze. "Are you asking me to leave?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next morning, I was standing outside that house. The same house my father had built. With just a small bag of clothes. Homeless. Alone. Betrayed by my own blood. That night, I slept on a park bench. The cold wind cut through my thin sweater. And every sound of footsteps made me shiver with fear. I clutched my small bag tightly. The only belongings I had left. Inside was one photograph of my parents. And a diary where I used to write my dreams. Dreams that now felt shattered. The next morning, I walked the streets, hoping to find something, anything. A job, a kind face, maybe even a miracle. But reality was harsh. Every shopkeeper I approached looked me up and down and said the same words. "Sorry, we're not hiring." Some didn't even bother to answer. By afternoon, my legs ached. My throat was dry. And my stomach growled so loudly that people stared. I sat on the sidewalk, hugging my knees, wondering how my life had turned into this nightmare. Just a few months ago, I had a home, a father, a family. Now, I had nothing. And yet, something inside me refused to give up. That evening, I found a small diner at the edge of town. I walked in and asked the manager, my voice trembling, "Please. I'll do anything. Wash dishes, clean tables. I just need work." He stared at me for a long moment. Then finally nodded. "Fine. You start tomorrow. Minimum wage. Don't be late." I almost cried with relief. The job was brutal. Washing greasy dishes until midnight. Carrying trays that were too heavy for my small frame. Scrubbing floors while customers laughed and spilled drinks. But it was work. It was survival. Every dollar I earned, I saved carefully. One for food. One for rent at the tiny room I managed to find in a rundown building. And a little, just a little, I kept hidden in an envelope under my pillow. Because deep inside, I promised myself something. This isn't forever. One day, I will rise. And the people who betrayed me will see what I've become. That promise became my fuel. Even on the nights I cried myself to sleep. Even when my hands bled from scrubbing floors. I held on to that one thought. Karma was watching. And one day, karma would answer. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. My routine was the same. Wake up before dawn. Walk to the diner. Work until my body ached. Return to my tiny rented room and collapse on the mattress. It wasn't a life. It was survival. But survival, at least, meant I was still here. One night, after my shift ended, I walked past the small park where street performers often played music. A boy strummed his guitar. A woman sang with such passion that strangers stopped to listen. And suddenly, I remembered something. When I was a child, my father had bought me a second-hand piano. The keys were chipped, some didn't even play right. But oh, how I loved it. I would sit for hours, letting my fingers dance across the keys. Losing myself in the sound. For the first time in months. A faint spark lit up inside me. What if I could play again? What if music could give me a way out of this misery? The thought felt dangerous, almost like a dream I wasn't allowed to have. But once planted, it refused to leave. The next evening, I asked my diner manager nervously. "Sir, do you know any place where I could find an old piano?" He frowned. "A piano? What for? You don't have money for luxuries." I lowered my eyes, embarrassed. I used to play. I thought maybe I could." To my surprise, he sighed and muttered. "There's a church down the street. They have an old piano in the basement. Maybe they'll let you use it." The very next day, after my shift ended, I went to that church. The caretaker was an elderly woman with kind eyes. When I asked, she smiled softly. "The piano is broken, child. But, if you don't mind the sound, you may play." My hands trembled as I touched the keys. Some stuck, some wobbled. But when the first note rang out, something inside me awakened. For the first time since my father's death, I felt alive. Tears blurred my vision as I played a simple tune from memory. The sound echoed in the empty basement. Raw and imperfect. But it was mine. That night, as I walked back to my room, my heart was lighter than it had been in months. The diner gave me money to survive. But this piano? This was hope. And hope is the seed of revenge. Because now, I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning to dream again, night after night. I returned to that dim church basement. The cracked piano keys became my only companions. Each note carried a piece of my sorrow. Each melody whispered the pain I could not speak aloud. I thought I was alone. Always alone. Until one evening, when I finished playing a song, I heard the faint sound of clapping. Startled, I spun around. In the shadows, by the basement door, stood a tall man in a dark coat. I froze, heart pounding. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I shouldn't be here. I'll leave." But the man raised his hand gently. "Don't stop. Please." That was beautiful. His voice was calm, almost soothing. I narrowed my eyes, unsure if he was mocking me. "This piano is broken. My music is nothing." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "No. Music is never nothing. It carries truth. And truth moves people." For the first time in so long, someone had actually listened to me. Really listened. He introduced himself simply as Adrian. "A traveler," he said. "Someone who enjoyed wandering the city at night." But there was something in his gaze. Sharp, observant, like he carried secrets of his own. You play with pain, Adrian murmured. But also with strength. That's rare. I didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to me like that before. When he left, his words stayed with me. They echoed louder than the music itself. That night, I lay awake in my rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling. For months, I had felt invisible. Broken. Forgotten. But now, someone had seen me. And sometimes, being seen is the first step toward reclaiming yourself. Little did I know, Adrian's arrival in my life was no coincidence. Fate was moving. And soon, my quiet notes of sorrow would become the thunder of revenge. Adrian began visiting often. At first, I thought it was coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. He would sit quietly, hands in his pockets, listening as I played my broken piano. Sometimes, he asked gentle questions. Where did you learn to play? Why does your music sound so heavy? And slowly, like peeling layers of an old wound, I told him. I told him about my father's sudden death. About the relatives who stole everything. About the cold nights I spent hungry and alone. As I spoke, my voice shook. Tears blurred my vision. I hadn't shared these memories with anyone before. But Adrian didn't interrupt. He didn't pity me. He just listened. Eyes sharp, like a man storing every detail. When I finished, the silence was heavy. My chest felt raw, exposed. Finally, Adrian leaned forward. His voice low and steady. Elara, do you know what I hear in your story? I wiped my eyes. What? Injustice. Cruelty. People who believed they could destroy you and walk away without consequence. His words stung, because they were true. I whispered, what could I do? I was powerless. I am still powerless. Adrian shook his head slowly. No one is powerless. They only make you believe that. The truth is, every wound carries a fire inside it. The question is, will you let it consume you? Or will you turn it into strength? His words lodged deep in my heart. A dangerous seed. A whisper that refused to leave me. For nights after, I lay awake, replaying his voice. No one is powerless. I imagined the faces of those who betrayed me. Their laughter, their greed. And for the first time, instead of pain, I felt something else. Anger. It pulsed like electricity through my veins. Not the wild, reckless anger of desperation, but a cold, sharp anger that demanded justice. And somewhere in the shadows, Adrian smiled. As if he knew exactly what he had planted inside me. The piano no longer sounded the same. Where once I played songs of sorrow and loss, now the notes grew heavier, darker. Each key I pressed carried weight. Each melody felt like a storm gathering inside me. Adrian noticed. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. A faint smile playing on his lips. You're changing, he said softly. Do you feel it? I paused, hands trembling over the keys. I feel anger. And it scares me. Adrian stepped closer, his voice steady. Don't fear it. Harness it. Anger is not weakness, it's fuel. But only if you control it. Play it. Shape it. Make it yours. And so I did. Every night, my music grew sharper. Like knives hidden in a song. The sorrow was still there. But now it burned with fire. Soon, people passing by the church began to stop and listen. Strangers whispered at the door. Drawn by the strange, haunting sound. They didn't know my name. But they felt my pain. And in their silence, I realized I was no longer invisible. One night, when I finished playing, Adrian approached and placed a small notebook on the piano. What's this? I asked. A map, he said. Not of streets, but of choices. You've been wronged, Elara. If you want justice, you must prepare yourself. Strength doesn't come only from music. It comes from knowledge. From strategy. I opened the notebook. Inside were pages of notes, plans, and strange symbols I didn't yet understand. My heart raced. Why are you helping me? Adrian looked at me, his eyes shadowed. Because I know what it feels like to be broken. And I know how it feels to rise again. His words sent shivers down my spine. That night, as I walked back to my tiny room, I realized something had changed. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing. For the first time since my father's death, I felt a spark of power. A whisper of destiny. And deep inside, the melody of revenge began to play. Adrian no longer came just to listen. Now, he came to teach. Not in a classroom. Not with books or lectures. But in whispers, in the quiet corners of the city. He showed me how to observe. Every person carries their story in their eyes, their hands, their steps, he said. Learn to see, and nothing will be hidden from you. He taught me patience. Revenge is not chaos. It is not wild anger. It is precise. It is sharp. Like a blade. At first, I struggled. I was clumsy, distracted by the weight of my memories. But Adrian never scolded me. Instead, he would repeat, over and over. Control the fire. Don't let it burn you. Make it burn them. Days turned into weeks. I worked at the diner by day. But by night, I trained. We walked through crowded streets. And Adrian made me notice things I never had before. The nervous twitch of a liar's hands. The greedy eyes of a man counting money. The forced smile of someone hiding guilt. Your enemies won because you were blind, he told me. But when your eyes are open, no one can deceive you again. His words sank deep into me. My grief began to harden into resolve. The girl who once cried herself to sleep was fading. In her place, someone new was awakening. At the piano, my music changed too. It was no longer just sadness. It carried steel. Strength. A warning. Strangers who heard me play began to whisper. Some said the music gave them chills. Others said it sounded like a storm was coming. And maybe it was. Because Adrian was right. I could feel it. The fire inside me was no longer wild. It was under my control. For the first time, I wasn't just dreaming of revenge. I was preparing for it. And the world, especially those who betrayed me, had no idea what was coming. Weeks passed. My routine became a double life. By day, I scrubbed dishes at the diner, pretending to be invisible. By night, I trained in shadows, learning to see the world as Adrian did. One evening, Adrian placed a folded newspaper in front of me. Read this, he said. I unfolded it with trembling hands. And froze. There they were. The faces I could never forget. My uncle and aunt. The very people who had stolen my father's property. Who had thrown me into the streets with nothing. In the photo, they were smiling. Dressed in fine clothes. Standing in front of a new mansion. The headline read, Local family celebrates new business success. My stomach churned. I could almost hear their mocking voices again. Telling me I was worthless. That I would never survive. I clenched my fists. The paper crumpling in my hands. They live in luxury, while I nearly starved. Adrian's eyes narrowed. And what will you do about it, Alara? I wanted to scream. I wanted to march to their mansion and burn it to the ground. But Adrian shook his head, as if reading my thoughts. Revenge is not about rage. It is about balance. They took everything from you. So you must take everything from them. His words hit me like thunder. That night, I could barely sleep. Images of their smiling faces haunted me. But alongside the rage, something else stirred inside me. A vision. Not of their deaths. That would be too simple. Too quick. No. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. The hunger. The fear. The emptiness. The helplessness. They needed to be broken. Piece by piece. For the first time. I wasn't just imagining revenge. I was planning it. And as I drifted into restless sleep, I whispered into the darkness. Father. I promise. They will pay. Not in blood. But in suffering. I knew rage alone wouldn't win this. Adrian had taught me that. So I learned to watch instead. To listen. To wait. For weeks, I followed their patterns like a shadow. Not in obvious ways. In small things. The routes they took to the market, the time their drivers stopped at a certain bank. The name of the accountant who always seemed nervous when my uncle was around. I kept a little notebook. Not songs this time. Details. Dates. Phone numbers. People they trusted. One evening, I sat with Adrian in the dim light of the church basement. He poured 2 cups of tea, then looked at my list. You've become meticulous, he said. Good. Now we turn details into pressure. How? I whispered. My throat was dry with expectation. Adrian's smile was thin. They have masks, Ilera. A public smile. A private life. People like them hide where it hurts the most: finances, reputation, connections. We will not destroy them. We will just unmake the illusions they built. We started small. No violence. No public shouting. Only nudges. Small truths placed where they would hurt. I learned the accountant's schedule. I left an anonymous envelope at the firm. A polite note, and a photocopy of an invoice that didn't match their public claims. It was enough to make the accountant worry. Enough to make him call late into the night. I did the same with the driver. A carefully worded message, nothing illegal, just facts, slipped under the windshield wiper of the car they used for meetings. At first it was amusement on my side. A cat playing with a ball. But the ball rolled, and the ripples began. Within days, there were small cracks. A supplier called my uncle with concerns about a delayed payment. The accountant stopped sleeping. My uncle began taking meetings in private. He paced the mansion at odd hours. He started to look worried in a way I had never seen. I watched them unravel, quietly. It was not that I enjoyed their fear. It was that their fear mirrored the nights I had faced. That recognition tasted like justice. Yet I did not go to the press. I did not shout their secrets. Adrian reminded me. The world listens to drama. We deliver the truth. Let them deal with the noise. So we kept being careful. A phone call here, a discreet email there. We planted tiny seeds of doubt in the places they depended on most. Investors. Suppliers. The bank. But the most powerful move came unexpectedly. A cousin of mine, someone who had never been kind, received a letter. It was written in a plain, steady hand. Not threatening. Not cruel. Just facts. Dates and amounts. Simple numbers that, when seen together, looked ugly. He opened it at dinner. His face drained. My uncle tried to comfort him. But the worry in his eyes was plain to anyone watching. That night, as I walked home, I felt something light inside me. Not triumph. Not yet. But a beginning. We had pulled one small thread. And the garment of their lies had started to fray. I slept for the first time in months without nightmares. Because for the first time in months, I felt that I was not alone in this fight. I had a plan. I had justice shaping up like a slow, relentless tide. And somewhere, in the quiet, Adrian nodded as if he'd expected this all along. He didn't smile. He only said, "Tomorrow, we watch. We gather. And when they stumble, we will be ready." I closed my eyes. Outside, the city hummed. Inside me, a new melody began, not of sorrow now, but of purpose. The ripple became a wave. What started as small doubts in the accountant's mind soon became something uglier. Suppliers called. Late payments. Questions about invoices. A phone call from a bank manager, polite at first, then blunt. My uncle paced by the big window of his study. At night, lights burned long into the dark. He jumped at every phone ring. He stopped laughing. My aunt grew brittle. She snapped at the gardener, at the children, at anyone who asked too many questions. The polished smiles they wore at gatherings began to crack. At the next family dinner, the mood was heavy. No music. No jokes. Only forced forks and eyes avoiding each other. My cousin, the one who had once taunted me in the schoolyard, sat down across the table and stared at his hands. His confident smirk was gone. He kept glancing at his phone. When he finally whispered, I pretended not to hear. That night, when the family dispersed, my cousin hesitated and then, quietly, knocked on my door. I opened it, surprised to see him standing there. He looked small and scared. "Can we talk?" he asked. Inside, the house felt familiar and foreign. The walls held memories of childhood laughter, and the air smelled faintly of my mother's old perfume. He sat, avoided my eyes, then said, "They're asking questions. The accountant, he's saying the records don't match. He said someone might look into the deeds." My heart stopped. "Do you know anything?" I asked. He swallowed. I signed some papers for him once. Back when you left. I trusted him. I thought he was family. But now? He told me to sign here and here. He said it was just paperwork. I didn't read it. His confession landed like a stone. If my cousin had signed, then there might be a thread to pull. A thread that could reveal what had been hidden. A thread that could expose forgery. My hands trembled. All those nights of sleeping on a bench, all those mornings scrubbing plates, came flooding back. But this was different now. This was leverage. I asked my cousin one thing. "Can you get me a copy of what you signed?" He hesitated, loyalty and fear wrestling in his face. Then nodded and promised to try. The next days were brutal. The family turned on itself. Whispers became accusations. Meetings behind closed doors. My uncle started calling lawyers. He looked older, smaller. Adrian watched me through it all. He never pushed. He only said, calmly, "Gather the proof. Let the truth do the work." So I started gathering my own proof. I went back through my father's old letters. The only things I had left when I ran. I unlocked the small safe in the attic with the key my mother had given me before she slept for the last time. Inside were faded receipts, a yellowed ledger, and a letter with my father's handwriting. There it was, a note that sounded like a will, or perhaps more a promise. "If anything happens to me, Elara will be cared for. Family must do right by family." My hands shook when I read it. It was not a legal will. But it was evidence of intention. Of a man's clear desire. I cross-referenced the names on those receipts with the invoices I'd glimpsed in the newspaper clippings Adrian had left me months ago. Patterns emerged. A supplier paid by my father years ago was now being billed twice under my uncle's new company. The picture began to sharpen. Then, the day my cousin finally came through, he handed me a shaky photocopy. A signed page with his name. A signature that, when compared to other documents, looked different. Oddly placed initials. A stamp that did not match the county records. My heart pounded. It wasn't a full confession, but it was a trail. Adrian suggested a careful approach. "No public spectacle yet," he warned. "Go to someone who knows the law. Someone who doesn't take bribes. Someone quiet and with backbone." I found a lawyer who did not care for pomp. A woman who ran a small practice and didn't tolerate nonsense. She examined my documents, nodded, and said, "This could be enough to force an audit. We can freeze certain accounts. We can request original deeds. But be prepared, this will get loud." Her words opened two doors at once. Fear and relief. That night, I slept with the photocopy under my pillow. Not to dream about revenge, but to remember the cost of silence. Word leaked, as it always does. The neighbors noticed men in suits, the bank calls, the hushed shouting. On the street where my uncle's mansion stood, People started to whisper in the market, and the look of contempt they once felt for me began to pivot, slowly, strangely, to curiosity. And in the house that had once been mine, people no longer raised their voices at the mention of my name. They lowered them. The family fractures widened. My aunt accused my uncle of mismanagement. My uncle accused a supplier. My cousin looked at me with shame and something like apology. One afternoon, my uncle called me into the study. His voice was small. "Ilara," he said, "we can fix this. You don't need to go to law." I looked at the man who had taken our home. I thought of my father's voice, of his proud hands covered in concrete and dust, of the promises he had made. "No," I said slowly. "My first choice is truth. My second is justice. If you want to make this right, start with the truth." He flinched as if I had struck him. He had expected me to beg, to plead. He had expected me to be small. Instead, I was steady. The next morning, the news vans came. Not yet national, but local outlets smelled the story. The town talked. People filed into the courthouse steps. And my name, Ilara, finally rose above the whispers. It was terrifying and liberating at once. My cousin kept his promise and handed over more pages. My lawyer filed the first motions. And while the court moved slowly, the family's public image cracked wide open. They would fight back. They would lie. They would try to bury the truth like they had once tried to bury me. But now I had allies, a lawyer who believed in evidence, a cousin who had the courage to hand over what he signed, and Adrian, who stood by, silent and unfazed. Karma had started its work. And I was not the same girl who had been shoved onto a bench. I had papers, a plan, and the patience to see the dark through to the light. The courthouse smelled of paper and polish. The air was heavy, full of whispers and shuffling feet. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, old teachers, merchants from the market. All had come to watch. The story had spread. The forgotten daughter is back. She has evidence. She is taking her family to court. I walked in with my lawyer. My steps echoed too loudly. My hands trembled, but I lifted my chin. Across the room, my uncle sat, flanked by expensive lawyers in sharp suits. His face was stiff, his jaw set. Beside him, my aunt looked pale. And my cousin. He avoided my eyes. Shame sat heavy on his shoulders. The judge entered. The room rose. And then it began. First, my lawyer spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, never shaking. She laid out the story in simple words. A child was left with nothing. Her family claimed her home. Documents were signed, but signatures do not match. Numbers do not add up. This court deserves to see the truth. Then the papers came forward. The photocopies. The receipts from my father's hand. The letter that sounded like a will. One by one, they were read aloud. The sound of my father's words. His handwriting, carried into this room, was like hearing him again. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, but I sat still. My uncle's lawyer tried to dismiss it. This is sentimental. Not binding. A child's fantasy. But then came the accountant. Summoned under oath. He hesitated. He sweated. And then, with eyes downcast, he admitted. Yes, there were irregularities. Yes, invoices were duplicated. Yes. I was told to keep the records quiet. The room gasped. The judge leaned forward. The words were heavy, undeniable. I looked at my uncle. His face had turned gray. He gripped the arm of his chair until his knuckles went white. Next, my cousin's copy was presented. The mismatched stamp. The shaky signature. The clerk of the court compared it to official records. The difference was clear. The whispers in the audience grew louder. People leaned forward. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now looked at me with wide, searching eyes. For years, they believed I was forgotten. That I had no strength, no claim. But now, the documents, the testimony, the evidence, turned silence into recognition. The judge called for recess. The room buzzed with tension. Reporters scribbled notes. My lawyer whispered. This is good. Very good. But stay calm. They will fight harder now. I stepped outside. Onto the courthouse steps. And the flash of cameras blinded me. A microphone was pushed into my face. Are you seeking revenge? Or justice? Someone asked. I thought of my father's promise. My mother's silence. The nights I had slept on benches. The plates I had washed. And I said softly, I want only the truth. Let the truth decide. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Some wept. Behind me, my uncle emerged. He barked at reporters. Called it a smear. Called me ungrateful. But his voice cracked. His anger looked like desperation. That night, news channels carried both our faces. Side by side. The lost daughter challenges the empire. The story spread beyond the town. Beyond the city. And for the first time, I felt the weight begin to shift. Not completely. Not victory yet. But a current moving in my favor. When I returned home, Adrian was waiting. He smiled faintly. His calm eyes steady. You see, he said. Karma moves slowly. But when it begins, it does not stop. And for the first time in years, I believed him. The next day in court felt colder. Even though the sun streamed through the tall windows. The air inside was heavy, sharp, like a storm brewing. My uncle's lawyers came prepared. They no longer laughed. They no longer brushed me aside. Now, they were fighting. One lawyer stood, pacing slowly before the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice firm, almost theatrical. This case is nothing but a tragic attempt by a girl to rewrite her family's history. The documents she presents are sentimental, incomplete, unverified. We have the real will. We have the real records. And they will show that everything my client did was legal. He produced a folder. Inside was a neatly typed will, stamped, signed, and dated. My father's name was there. His signature was there. And according to this paper, every asset, every brick, every dollar was left to my uncle. The courtroom gasped. My heart froze. It looked so clean. So perfect. And for a moment, I almost doubted myself. The lawyer continued. This poor child is blinded by grief. She cannot accept that her father trusted his own brother, not his daughter, to continue the family's legacy. It is sad, but the truth is not always kind. His words cut into me like knives. But my lawyer whispered. Don't panic. Trust the cracks. And the cracks appeared sooner than expected. When the document was examined, the paper was new. Too new for a will that was supposed to be 10 years old. The ink shimmered under the lights. And the signature, though eerily similar, bore the same flaw as the last forgery. The judge frowned. The audience shifted. But my uncle's lawyer didn't stop. He turned the attack personal. He spoke of my teenage mistakes. Of nights I'd spent wandering after my father's death. Of the part-time jobs. The nights in shelters. He twisted them into evidence of instability. She is unreliable, he declared. She is not responsible. How can someone who could not hold her life together be trusted with the family's fortune? Whispers rippled through the room. I clenched my fists. My cheeks burned. For a moment, I wanted to stand and shout. To tell them they had no right to judge my scars. But then Adrian's words returned to me. Karma moves slowly. But when it begins, it does not stop. So I stayed quiet. I let my lawyer rise. She faced the judge calmly. Your Honor, she said. What my learned friend forgets is this. Strength is not measured by wealth or reputation. It is measured by survival. This young woman was cast out, abandoned, erased. And still, she stands. The question is not whether she is worthy of her father's trust. The question is whether this court will allow fraud to erase a child's rightful place. Her words settled like stones in water. No one moved. But outside the courtroom, the counterattack continued. That evening, I returned to my small apartment. My phone buzzed with messages. Threats. Warnings. Drop the case or you'll regret it. Walk away while you can. Strangers lingered outside my building. Cars slowed when I walked at night. Shadows followed me. It was fear. It was pressure. But it only proved one thing. They were afraid of me. One night, as I stood on my balcony, I saw my cousin waiting below. His face pale, his eyes restless. He called softly. Ilera, please. Stop this. You don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy everything. I stared at him. And for the first time, I saw guilt in his eyes. But guilt without courage. He wanted me silent, not because I was wrong, but because I was right. I turned away without answering. The fight was no longer just about inheritance. It was about truth. It was about dignity. It was about reclaiming my father's promise. The days in court stretched on. More evidence surfaced. More lies crumbled. And each time the truth pushed through, my uncle's face darkened. His empire cracked just a little more. But deep inside me, I knew the final battle was still ahead. The day when the verdict would come. The day when the truth would either rise or be buried forever. The final day of the trial arrived. The courthouse looked different that morning. Not because the building had changed, but because everyone inside knew. Today, everything would be decided. The benches were packed. Reporters lined the hallways. Microphones waited outside. Neighbors, strangers, even people from other towns had come to see the ending of a story that had gripped everyone for weeks. When I entered, my hands shook. My breath was shallow. But I forced myself to stand tall. Because I wasn't just walking for myself. I was walking for my father. For the little girl he left behind. Across the room, my uncle sat stiff. His jaw clenched, his eyes hollow. Beside him, my aunt avoided everyone's gaze. And my cousin. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. He looked less like an heir, and more like a boy who knew the truth was coming. The judge's gavel struck. Court is in session. The lawyers began their closing arguments. My uncle's lawyer stood first. His voice was sharp, full of pride. Like a man still trying to hold a crumbling wall upright. Your Honor, this case is built on emotion. On grief. On resentment. The law is clear. The will names my client. The assets belong to him. The girl's story is tragic, yes. But sympathy cannot replace legality. He paced slowly, his words echoing across the room. He lifted the supposed will high in the air, shaking it like a sacred text. This, he declared, is the truth. And we must respect it. Then he sat down. For a moment, the room was quiet. Heavy. Then my lawyer rose. She did not rush. She did not shout. Her voice was steady. The kind of calm that carries more weight than anger ever could. Your Honor, she began. We do not ask for sympathy. We ask for truth. We do not ask for pity. We ask for justice. She walked to the evidence table. She lifted the forged will. Then laid it beside the documents written in my father's own hand. Compare them. One is too perfect. Too clean. The other carries the mark of a man's hand. The weight of his words. His love for his child. She turned toward the judge. Fraud is not law. Greed is not justice. And silence is not proof. This young woman lost her father. She was cast aside by her blood. And yet, she survived. She fought. And now she stands here, not for revenge, but for recognition of what is rightfully hers. Her words trembled in the air like music. People in the courtroom leaned forward. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The judge's gaze shifted. He called forward the final witness. A handwriting expert. The expert laid both signatures under the lamp. He pointed to subtle details. The slant of the pen. The pressure at the end of each letter. The rhythm of the strokes. And then he said clearly, "This document," he lifted the forged will, "is not authentic. It is a fabrication." The words hit the room like thunder. Gasps filled the air. Reporters scribbled furiously. Neighbors whispered to one another. I looked at my uncle. His face collapsed. His skin seemed to sag, like a mask melting in heat. My aunt covered her mouth with her hand, and my cousin lowered his head into his palms. The judge's gavel struck. Order. Order. Then he turned to my uncle. Do you have anything to say in your defense? For a long moment, my uncle stayed silent. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Finally, he whispered, I did what I had to. For the family. For the business. But no one believed him anymore. The courtroom was done with excuses. The judge looked at me. Ilera, he said. You have fought a hard battle. This court recognizes the documents in your favor. Your father's assets, his home, his legacy. They are rightfully yours. My heart stopped. The words echoed again and again. Rightfully yours. Rightfully yours. Tears blurred my vision. I pressed my hand to my chest. It was over. The years of silence. The nights of hunger. The weight of betrayal. All of it, over. The audience erupted. Some cheered. Some clapped. Some simply stared in awe. As if witnessing not just a verdict, but a resurrection. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Do you have anything to say? One shouted. I looked into the lens. And I said quietly. Karma may be slow. But it never forgets. And it never misses. The video played on every channel that night. People across the state, across the country, saw the face of the girl who refused to be erased. And though I had won the case, deep inside I knew. The story wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. It was about truth. It was about showing that no matter how dark the betrayal, justice will always find its way back. When the verdict was read, the crowd poured out of the courthouse like a tide. Some faces carried joy. Some carried shame. But all of them carried the memory of what had just happened. I walked down the steps slowly. Each footfall felt lighter. As if years of weight had finally slipped from my shoulders. Reporters shouted my name. Cameras flashed. But my eyes searched only for one thing. The faces of the people who had once called themselves my family. I found them standing together by the steps. My uncle's eyes were hollow. His pride shattered into pieces too small to gather. My aunt's hands shook as she clutched her purse. And my cousin. My cousin couldn't even meet my gaze. I stopped in front of them. The silence between us was louder than any words. At last, my uncle spoke. His voice was hoarse, broken. You've destroyed us. Everything your father built. It's gone. I looked at him. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. No, I said quietly. I didn't destroy it. Greed did. You did. He flinched. As if the truth itself had struck him harder than any verdict. My aunt whispered. Ilera, forgive us. We only wanted security. We thought it was the right thing. Her words trembled. But forgiveness did not come easily. I thought of the nights I had gone hungry. The years I had been invisible. The coldness of their silence when I had begged for love. I shook my head slowly. Forgiveness is not mine to give. Karma has already spoken. Tears welled in her eyes. But she said nothing more. My cousin finally raised his head. For a moment, our eyes locked. And I saw the boy he once was. My playmate, my brother in childhood. Now buried under shame. He opened his mouth. But no words came. He turned away. And I knew then. Their punishment was not just the loss of wealth. It was the weight of their choices. The emptiness they carried now. With nothing to shield them from the truth. As for me, I walked forward. Past the cameras. Past the questions. Past the broken ties. Adrian waited at the bottom of the steps. His smile was calm. His eyes warm. "You did it," he said softly. I nodded. But more than victory, I felt peace. That night, as I stood in my father's house again, the house that was finally mine, I whispered into the silence. "Papa, I kept your promise. Your daughter is not forgotten. Your daughter still stands." The walls seemed to breathe with me. And for the first time in years, I felt like home had returned, and that was my story. Family betrayed me. But karma brought me justice. If you believe in karma, drop a comment with your country and the time you're watching this. And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Karma's Call, where every story proves one truth. No matter how dark betrayal may seem, karma always finds its way.